Hey, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for joining today in this video where I'm going to talk about my experience with traveling and just some tips that I've learned along the way. I've done a bit of traveling in my life, definitely not a huge amount by any means, but I just came back from a trip recently where, I learned a few extra lessons and I thought I would share some of that, including lessons I've learned from previous trips. And if you have been following me for a bit, whether it's through this channel or my photography channel Pushing Film, you'll know that I did a trip for about 6 weeks with my partner Sarah, where we started in Vietnam, did a couple of weeks there, then went to Japan from there, did another couple of weeks, and then ended in Bangladesh. And I hadn't posted anything to this channel for a while, and I thought this would make a good topic. It's something that I notice comments and questions about, whether it's to do with, let's say photography and how to pack film, going through x-rays and all this kind of stuff, or safety. Okay, so the first thing I thought I would talk about is planning and how that relates to planning your trip or your travels, because this can vary from person to person. The general consensus that I have is that you definitely want to put some thought into planning your trip and making sure you don't just leave everything to chance. The thing that can vary from person to person, in my experience talking to people, is some people like to really plan everything down to the detail, whereas other people like to just plan, let's say I want to go to a country and this city and then a few little things and then just let all of it be random and just kind of take it as it comes. You'll probably know which one of those types of people you are and how you want to approach that. So I won't really tell you which approach to take. This last trip was somewhere in the middle, maybe a little bit leaning towards having a fair bit of planning done, because the nature of the trip, the amount of countries, the amount of different cities that we did necessitated an additional level of planning than you might otherwise have needed if you're just going to one city. And thankfully, Sarah, my partner, did so much in terms of planning, created an amazing itinerary in Notion that she was able to share with me and our friend who was going to meet us in Vietnam. So again, it really depends. It depends on the trip you're doing and the type of person you are, how much you want to leave to chance and all that kind of stuff. But what I really want to impart, besides giving you all that information, is that if you are going to plan, don't be upset when things don't go to plan. And I think that comes without saying. So I'll touch more on that later as we go on, but definitely put some thought into it. Don't leave it all to chance. You don't want to not have done your research, basically go on a trip and then find that things didn't work out and then you just face too many hurdles due to that lack of planning. Okay, so the next part of the video I thought I would talk about is travel essentials. Okay, so this could be things like your bookings, your tickets, your money exchange, and all that kind of stuff. I know that kind of relates back to planning, but I thought I would give it its own section, because if you're not going to overplan your trip, you should at the very least cover all your essential bases. Look into the requirements, at least do a bit of research into the country you're traveling to, if there's going to be any unexpected rules or regulations to do with entry, to do with whatever it might be. And for example, that could be the visa requirements. Some people, I've heard horror stories where they didn't properly look into the visa requirements, thought it was one way, then turned out to be another, and they couldn't even get into the country and change things altogether. And I know a lot of this can still happen even if you do your research, but definitely just do the bare minimum of research when it comes to that kind of thing, because you don't want to just dive into the deep end and hope for the best. Sure, that could work out, but definitely I think it's worth covering those essentials. Now, when it comes to something like money, that kind of falls into that. So look into the exchange rate that you would get if you were going to exchange some money beforehand. These days, people aren't really exchanging as much cash as they used to, because the world is opening up to more electronic transactions and using cards. So one of the tips I wanted to give that I've been using over my last few trips is to get one of those travel cards that allows you to either put your own money on there, or it could be a credit card, but basically one that has a good international conversion rate for most countries and little to no international transaction fees. Because if you just go and use your regular bank card sometimes or credit card, you could be not only getting a really bad conversion rate in that country, but also getting charged each time you purchase something. Or, let's say you want to withdraw cash, that could work out even worse. So the one I've been using lately is the Wise card. It actually works really well because you can pre-convert money before your trip. So you could be, let's say, traveling to the US in 6 months, and then you can look up what the current exchange rate is if you want to buy US dollars. And then it could be at a nice peak where you find, all right, this is a really good rate and it's dropping, so I want to buy some while it's at a good rate. So you can pre-buy that currency on your Wise card and then use it overseas. Now, you don't have to use that. In the past, I've used others like 28 Degrees, and we have others here in Australia. So it really depends where you are. Yeah, I know Wise is becoming more popular. A friend put me onto it. I've joined Sarah ended up getting one, and most people I speak to lately, they're using Wise or a similar type of setup for their currency that saves you a lot of hassle and can end up saving you money as well. Third section of the video relates to a popular topic, and that's packing. And this is something I'm always learning lessons through, because the lesson I keep learning and having reinforced to me each time I go on a trip is that you can always pack less. You can almost always go on a trip and find that you bought things that you didn't end up needing as much as you thought you would, or at all. And you're just carrying that weight around, whether it's in your checked luggage, whether it's carry-on. I think it can make a big difference if you put some thought into what you will and won't need. So also ask yourself, is it a definite need or is it a maybe? And if it's a maybe, or probably I'll need this item or bit of clothing or whatever it might be, if the chances are just a 50-50 or less than that, then ask yourself if it's just something you can get easily at your destination. Whether it's your accommodation already has that available, or your Airbnb, or it's really cheap to buy in that country you're going to. Let's say you didn't bring enough of toiletries or toothpaste or something. Oftentimes you can just easily pick that up wherever you are, and a lot of countries it might be the same price or cheaper than where you're bringing it from home. So think about what you're packing and what is really necessary. And I'm definitely not perfect in this by any means, and that's why I'm always learning that lesson. And I think I would love to get to a point where I can really travel light and not even have checked luggage. I know that's difficult to impossible depending on the place you're going to, the weather and all that kind of stuff. Who knows what you're going to end up needing while traveling anyway. You can't expect yourself to have every single item that might end up being required. And I thought I would put in a little section related to photography for any of the other photographers out there like myself who love to take camera gear and document their travels and their trip. Same thing applies. Don't overpack. I've learned this lesson. One of my first trips that I did was a solo trip to Japan about 10 years ago now. And I remember taking a whole bunch of different lenses and really big ones at that, and tripods, whatever it could have been, that ended up being just too much. Sure, I've found ways to end up using those items, but I just as easily could have gotten away with reducing some of that weight. And again, I don't want to come across as hypocritical here, because I do love photography and a lot of what I do relates to making YouTube videos. So I do end up taking a lot of camera gear, but it depends on whether you're in a similar boat or you're just recreationally shooting or whatever. Because let's say if I'm just doing an interstate trip, I often just take one camera and then, one lens. And yeah, I just thought I would put that out there. All right, just looking at my notes now, the next thing that I wanted to speak about is expectations versus, actual experience. So tempering your expectations and how that can balance with the actual experience you end up having. So if you over expect certain things of your trip, that this destination or this place is going to be amazing, or you're going to avoid certain areas, that area could end up being the best thing, or the place that you thought you hyped up could be a letdown. So don't create high expectations or really rigid expectations of your trip in general or of certain segments of it, because then you set yourself up for disappointment. Again, kind of goes without saying, but it's just something that I try and remind myself whenever I'm traveling or going on trips to certain places. If you create really high expectations, even if it's just, say, it's not even traveling overseas, you're just going into the city for a festival or an event. Like, let's say you're a photographer like myself and you think, oh, it's going to be an awesome photography opportunity. I've seen previous photos of this event. There was some really cool stuff, and there's going to be this amount of crowd and this kind of people that I'm going to meet and whatever. And you get there and it's just, a big letdown. You kind of regret that you ever went, because you created such high expectations of it, as opposed to just going with an open mind. And when it comes to traveling, I think this really applies, that you can have some of the best experiences which were spontaneous in nature and not really created by some expectation of what you had studied beforehand or seen in photos online or heard from your friends. And another part of this is the unexpected. So another lesson I learned recently, or was reminded of, is that expect the unexpected. You can have mishaps on your trip. Like, I got sick twice on this last holiday, and that's coming from someone who, doesn't really get sick very often. I hadn't been sick for a couple of years, and it really affected a few days at least out of the Japan portion of the overall holiday. So for example, I couldn't go out and do as many things as I would have liked. I couldn't meet up with certain people, but luckily I didn't have overly rigid expectations of those things. So that's why I'm kind of trying to help remind you and myself at the same time of, tempering those expectations and knowing that things don't always go to plan. But you know what? I still had a great time. I still tried to go for walks during those days and find something to observe while in Japan and to, have fun with. All right, for the next part, I want to talk about culture and connecting with culture and making those connections while you're traveling, especially overseas. So a big part of traveling overseas, at least for me, is the idea of experiencing a completely different culture or even a slightly different culture or something that is new and exciting and different. That is what I think draws the majority of people to traveling. So I think it's worth putting or investing a little bit of extra effort into not necessarily maximizing, but taking advantage of that aspect of traveling where you are going to be able to have the opportunity to learn even more and connect and experience the differences in culture. So it doesn't mean that you need to try everything, whether it comes to the food of that culture and meet every single person and completely learn the language, but maybe put a bit of effort into that. I think it will enrich the experience. So I'm not the best at this either, but what I try and do, for example, is at least do a bit of base research into the culture, a bit of the background. That way you'll also learn a bit of the rules, regulations, and customs and things like that. It's not easy to just pick up an entire new language, but it's not too hard to just pick up some basics, some bare minimum, especially these days when you have access to so many great language learning tools, whether it's through apps. You've got AI learning now. You've got so much audio resources available online, tutorials on YouTube and written articles through the internet. It's a lot easier than it used to be. So what I like to do if I'm traveling to a foreign country that speaks a different language is to just learn really basic stuff. And I know that's easier said than done, but I think it's worth putting a bit of effort into. So what I do is just cram, and I can't say I've done this for every country, but if I know I'm going to want to connect with people, I'll be encountering people where I might want to have, just basic interactions. Just study using an app or online for a few weeks or a couple of months or a few months, whatever it is. You might forget it all afterwards or a lot of it, but it will make that little bit of difference in breaking the barrier. Let's say in asking someone a question and they don't speak English or your language, and having conversations, interacting, they'll appreciate it more. You'll have a better time, and it helps you connect with that culture a little bit more. And that's coming from me as an fairly introverted person who really likes to just observe and kind of stay on the outside and just watch things. And I'm not all that much of a party animal or anything. So I don't like to just go out and do all that kind of stuff that maybe a younger generation would enjoy doing when they're traveling. But find ways that you can preempt yourself to have a better chance of connecting with that culture and experiencing it in a slightly deeper way. And with that, it's worth saying and just reminding you that it's important to respect the culture and the rules and regulations as well. Nobody's perfect, and there are certain things that might come across overly rigid, but don't just blatantly, disrespect rules and not know an absolute thing about the way things are done differently in this certain culture, whether it's in relation to the legal side, religious stuff, traditions. Just, have a basic understanding. So I'm just coming up to the last point that I had written down, and that's to think about balancing your time. So what I had written here is, things like minimizing old habits that don't really serve you while traveling, because if you're traveling, it's a limited amount of time. You might be only going for, let's say it's 1 or 2 weeks, and spending time on social media or watching movies and all that kind of stuff. Of course, I still do all that. I love to wind down and relax while I am traveling. Sometimes people go on holidays just to be able to do that. But if that's not why you're going, and if you are going to explore and experience the outside world, make sure you're not getting sucked in by that complacency that you just want to wake up, go on, social media or whatever it is and feel, I'll get to that thing later. You'll just get complacent. So put some of those things aside. If they can wait until you get back, do the bare minimum, and then make sure you're out there experiencing the place that you're traveling to. And again, you might have certain habits that are important to you to take with you wherever you are. So let's say it's a health routine, it's an exercise routine. You want to keep that up. You want to keep up your reading habit, your whatever it is. Even if, let's say, social media is part of your lifestyle or your work, sure, just keep doing that, but try and have a good balance of those old habits with maximizing your time in that country. So for example, for me, I love doing street photography. So I try and, if Sarah wants to sleep in and I've already woken up, I like to just go out and do a photo walk and just go for a walk, because then we have other things planned later in the day. So I've been able to take advantage of that. And then I might be back at the accommodation relaxing while she's doing something else later in the afternoon that I'm not involved in. So, just think about balancing and maximizing your time. And I think it'll just make your holiday feel a little bit fuller. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Those are my recent lessons from traveling this recent trip, and just things I've learned overall that I thought would be worth sharing with you. Again, I'm always learning through every trip and every experience when it comes to travel, and I don't do a lot, but I really enjoy it when I do. And this last trip was great. Yeah, if you have any questions, leave it in the comments. If there's anything specific that you want to know about my experience, I'm definitely not an expert. I'm not, one of these people that have got so many countries in their passport and spent so much time traveling, living overseas, all that kind of stuff. I'm fairly amateur, but hey, I have a YouTube channel where I talk about my personal experiences with things. So let me know if you have any particular questions. If you do want to check out some of my travel experience, given that I document a lot of it for YouTube, I've been posting various videos over on my other channel, Pushing Film, which you can, if you go down to the description, you can find a link for it. And yeah, you'll find vlogs which are very photography related, but if you don't mind that, I have vlogs from Vietnam, from Japan already up. I just posted my first one from Bangladesh, which was walking around, experiencing the chaotic streets of Dhaka, which I, love. I've been there 3 times now. And I think it's culturally one of the, most exciting places I've traveled to, because it is so different to here where I live. And yeah, if you find any of that interesting, head over there and check some of those videos out. Let me know what you think. You can leave a comment over there. But yeah, thanks for watching. Let me know what else you'd like to see here on the channel. I have some videos actually coming up. One of them is actually talking about Dhaka, which, again, because I've visited a few times now, I thought I would share some of my experience with that particular city, because it's such a great city, a great country, Bangladesh, that I thought not many people travel to. I'll share a bit of my experience having been there a few times, because I have that connection through Sarah and her family. Okay, so yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.